You know what phrase I'm really sick of that I keep hearing again and again? With great power comes great responsibility. It's this line from one of the original Spider-Man movies, and it's so annoying. With great power comes great responsibility. People keep saying it as though we're this new profound thing. But it does have the advantage of being true. And it's the kind of thing, Karen doesn't say this, but my guest today, Karen Yeung, who's an interdisciplinary professorial fellow in law, ethics, and informatics at Birmingham Law School and School of Computer Science, she doesn't say the phrase, thankfully. I don't think she does. But she does argue the point, and she argues that that's what the conversation is about today. Karen's main point is that the way that big tech companies are operating now, whether it's social media companies, whether it's the AI companies like Google or Anthropic or Microsoft, OpenAI, is that they are consolidating wealth and power. AI, the people who make decisions about how AI should be developed and deployed, are consolidating wealth and power. That would be bad, arguably by itself, or maybe it's not if they're really benevolent, although then we've got other kinds of concerns. But Karen thinks they're doing a tremendous amount of harm. They are creating environments of misinformation. They are eroding social solidarity, doing just a bunch of things to us that's bad for society. And the other thing that's really bad is that they're not held accountable. And Karen thinks that we should have some kind of say in how powerful technologies like AI are developed, deployed, used, etc. We should have, given that the way this technology is deployed and the kind of impact it has on our society and on our lives, we should have some say in how all this is supposed to unfold. We ask a bunch of questions together and explore a lot of different issues around this. One of the more interesting ones, I think, is, all right, but whose responsibility is this? Is it the responsibility of those AI companies? Is it the responsibility of government? Is it the responsibility of ourselves to build the kind of culture that shapes those companies in the right kind of way? And does sort of our view on this change if we go from, let's say, the US, where innovation is king, to Europe, where Karen is, where innovation isn't necessarily held to be as important as preserving social goods? So that's the conversation, wide-ranging, really important, and really interesting as always. Okay. If you want more from me, you can go to my Substack at readblackman.substack.com. If you have guests to recommend, or maybe you even want to be on this podcast, I don't know, email me at em@readblackman.com, and I'll have a look. We'll see. Maybe we chat. All right, enough about that. Let's go talk to Karen. All right, so Karen, you've got this sort of concern about AI. It's capable of lots of things, lots of maybe amazing things you think, I don't know. But one thing that you think is that it's really good at consolidating wealth and power. Is that right? So that you think that's something that AI is doing? And presumably, I suspect, you think this is a bad thing?
Actually, I don't think AI is doing that. I think people are doing that. And there are people who are making the decisions about AI development and investment and trajectories of deployment. So I think actually people are ultimately the problem, not really the technology. And I think of the incentives that people face in the kind of global capitalist order that we live in.
And okay, so do you just have in mind something like lots of money is going into these big AI companies, whether it's OpenAI or Microsoft or Google? They're pouring billions into AI, and that's the issue?
Yeah, it's slightly more complicated than just a lot of money is being invested.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably helpful to think in terms of political economy and the incredibly fast and rapid emergence of big tech dominance in the global economy and the fact that they're effectively in control of the big AI labs that at least we see in the US. That's very US dominated. And because they have extraordinary monopoly power, that is determining the trajectory in which AI is emerging into the lives of ordinary people.
I don't know, not quite push back, but let me be a cranky capitalist or something along those lines. Okay, what's the issue here? This is me putting on my cranky capitalist hat. What's the issue here? So you're upset that there are really smart people who have figured out some amazing things with technology. And yeah, as a result, they're gaining power and money, but that's what they deserve given that they're doing all this innovation. Are you saying that it's not AI, it's the people, it's not the people, it's the system is capitalism, we got to overthrow capitalism? Or is it the fact that they're accruing so much money and power? Or is it the fact that other people have less power as a result? Is it a sort of you're thinking of it as a finite resource? And if so, is it necessarily those companies' responsibilities to help the people who are not part of that AI ecosystem or something? So I don't know, that's a bunch of questions, but what's the big deal here?
Yeah.
Aside, unless it's just like, unless you're just saying capitalism is bad, let's move on.
I wouldn't say capitalism is bad per se. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. But I certainly think that it's really useful to think about the incentives that are powering and driving the patterns of development and the impact that the technology is having in the contemporary world and the general trajectory of travel. So I think it's a combination that is founded on the assumption of a global capitalist order, which is indeed the order that we live in. And so because of that, the incentives that companies face is to invest money in order to maximize shareholder returns. And it's designed to do that. But the trouble is, of course, there are market failures where the harms are imposed on other people. And the capitalist system doesn't actually encourage those costs to be internalized by those who've actually generated them. And I think we see that dynamic being played out in spades in the digital tech industry. And this has been exacerbated and accelerated by the emerging increasing sophistication of AI technology.
So can you give me some examples? So just spell out to me the ways in which the wealth and power is getting consolidated at the expense of other people or at the expense of society at large. There's lots of talk about things like, are you talking about things like job loss stuff? Or is it job loss issues? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so it's a really good place to start. What are the potential downsides or the adverse effects that I'm worried about? And I guess, well, we start with the early forms of AI where we saw big tech platforms emerging and all this excitement about the content that was becoming available and the way in which they could operate as intermediaries connecting people who wouldn't otherwise be connected to do this job and that job and the other. We particularly saw two dynamics became apparent. And firstly, the way in which we saw a fragmentation of the public sphere and the rise of misinformation. And we saw a lot of adverse effects, particularly for young people in terms of content, harassment, bullying, distress, but particularly the lack of a commitment to truth, because it became possible for anybody to speak. And the fact checking behind that speech became not so important anymore. And so we saw little pockets of communities emerging where they talk amongst each other. And I'm certainly in my own filter bubble. I think I know only one person who voted for Brexit, but there are a hell of a lot of them now. So this is one of the things that happened when the internet emerged. And of course, that was already being powered by machine learning and the distribution of content, the kind of content that you were reading online. And that consolidated the power of the big tech platforms. And so I think what's really crucial in this whole economic model that has emerged is that the core infrastructure is owned and controlled by a handful of extraordinarily powerful and wealthy firms in which most people don't actually have any say whatsoever. So a couple of key players are really determining what happens, what goes on. And they are the gatekeepers into what goes on their platforms and what doesn't go on. And their decisions about direction of travel, investment and deployment determine where everybody's lives end up moving, because this technology has become so prevalent, or internet-enabled technology has become so prevalent in our daily lives.
Yeah. I don't totally know what to make of this. So let's take a concrete case. I take it that you're at least implicitly referring to especially Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. At least that's got to be a prime example of the kind of thing that you have in mind, where Zuckerberg I think he has a controlling share in Facebook, Meta, whatever the hell they call it now, and lots of decisions. It's just up to him. Whatever he wants, that's the way that it goes.
Yeah, I think it's true of the 5 big tech companies now. So, that's Google, that's Meta, Facebook, that's Microsoft, incredibly powered by Microsoft. Now the chip companies are really, all the enablers of AI are also coming in on the act. But their decisions are certainly having a lot of influence about the direction of travel and who wins and who loses.
So I don't know so what do we make of this though? So suppose I say, yes, they've got a ton of power. They're they're publicly held companies, but they're not government entities. So suppose I say something like, that sucks, but what do we like?
What's the problem?
Now what? It's not what's the problem. The problem is that it looks like there's non-government entities that almost have the power to shape civil society in the way that government does, or with the kind of power that government does, but they're not government entities. Meanwhile, government is, at least in principle, representative, whereas these companies are not. They are companies that are aiming to satisfy their shareholders. Okay, but so I guess not what's the problem. It does feel like we're in a shitty situation where you have these sort of mini kingdoms, but that are sort of part of the country. I guess just don't. So, sorry, I know I'm fumbling here in a sense, but is the solution supposed to look like regulation? You referenced something like we don't have a say. So, what would it mean for us to have a say in how these companies operate? Why should Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Meta, blah blah blah? We don't own any part of their company. Why should they listen to us outside of market pressures? Yeah, so what are you imagining? Are you imagining a different way that these companies would be forced to operate or something along those lines?
Yeah, so let's just assume for the sake of argument that we begin with a market economy and that is okay. So in other words, let's assume that that's ethically acceptable, even though we don't get a choice in it, and that's that they establish the conditions under which we cooperate. And presumably we want to throw in the rule of law and democracy, and the market still operates in those contexts. And I'm very happy to accept the general liberal principle that everyone is free to do whatever they like, provided they do no harm to others. Very happy with that. Fine to me. The question is there any harm being done by this? And I think we've already identified that there are certainly some collective harms going on. But I think what we see here are market failures in a number of different ways that arise. And the number one market failure is the acquisition of the monopoly power that, according to economic theory, allows the incumbents to be lazy and to make decisions without constraint. Exactly in the way that you put it quite nicely, without accountability to the people that are affected, because they have so much power, they can be indifferent to those effects. And so I think that is one of the really problematic features of the dynamic that's going on. So I think there is market failure. I think there is exploitation. I think there is power without accountability. And I think, as you put it, I think this is a shitty situation.
When I say it's a shitty situation, or one thing that I intend to talk about is it feels to me like there are potentially cases in which lots of people are harmed, but no one's rights are violated. Not in any obvious way. I don't think that, at least maybe I'll change my mind in 10 seconds, but I can see myself thinking, this is an academic thing to say, right? What a non-committal academic thing.
Oh, no, I like that.
I can see myself thinking, Meta doesn't have an obligation to promote my well-being. They have an obligation to respect my legal rights, property rights, blah, blah, blah. But they're going to create a product. I may or may not enjoy it. Let's say I enjoy it enough, and it causes in me depression or anxiety or something along those lines. They haven't breached any legal obligation. I'm not sure that they ought to have a legal obligation not to create content that would upset me. How would you articulate such a policy or regulation? How would you implement it? How would you police it? That seems so objectionably vague and squishy. And what makes it a shitty situation, it's a bad situation if they're doing illegal things and they need to be prosecuted, but they're not being prosecuted and or they're wriggling out of prosecution because they've got really smart lawyers. That's a bad situation. It's shitty if we don't even have legal grounds to go after them, and we shouldn't have legal grounds to go after them. That's what I'm to have in mind with really shitty situation.
Yeah, I like to use the analogy with environmental degradation. Ground underneath your feet is being corroded and poisoned, but no individual suffers any specific harm. But if that process keeps going, there will be no ground upon which we can stand and together. So I like to think of, in some ways, the collective harms, and what I referred to as if you'll excuse the mouthful, the sort of the socio-technical foundations of freedom that are collectively. So the basic political and cultural infrastructure that we have hitherto taken for granted because of limitations on what was actually possible in terms of the enabling decision-making and the spreading of content and activity automatically simply wasn't there. So it wasn't so easy to erode the ground, if you like, because we just didn't have the tools. But now we have the tools, and the ground upon which we stand is being changed without us noticing, paying attention, or taking it seriously. And that's what I worry about.
Okay, so I want to hear at least two things. One is, I think, a fair request. The other is not fair. The unfair, maybe it's fair. I don't know. The clearly fair request is, can you say more about what you mean when you say there's socio-technological ways, methods, whatever it is, of undermining our freedom? I want to hear more about that line. The second request, which might be unfair because I'm basing it on your accent, is, do you think Europeans have a different view? I could see someone saying, yeah, look, Reed, of course, you're an American, so you think, what can we do about it? We're not going to pass laws against this kind of thing. It's capitalism, blah, blah, blah. But in Europe, we've got different views about the collective good and what we would have government do in support of the collective good, or at least in defense of the collective bad. Yeah, so that I want you to speak to as though there were the European perspective. I know there's not, but something along those lines. So first thing, socio-technological underpinnings for freedom, and second, Europe versus American perspectives.
Okay, so I guess to use a simpler example, and let's just leave AI out of this and just think about the power of communicating without intermediaries on the internet, which has now become commonplace. It's easy for people. It used to be a tweet. I don't know what you call it anymore, but people put content and nonsense and hate speech and all that sort of stuff out there in a way that they never used to. And one of the things in the old style media ecosystem, which I certainly do not wish to defend as perfect, and it had many problems with it, but at least editorial gatekeepers cared about the facts and the truth, and they would not allow things to get published that were patently lies. And this is an assumption that we used to hold true in an analog world, and we just took that to be the way the world works. And then the internet came and completely upended those basic assumptions upon which people made public announcements to the world. And that changed epistemic foundations so that actually it becomes much less easy to be confident that what we are seeing or what we are hearing is actually grounded in fact. And it also means that it's increasingly possible at the same time for these echo chambers where people simply decide, I'm only going to listen to X, Y, and Z, and all the other stuff I'm not going to hear, which is why I didn't know anyone who voted for Brexit, right? I was only listening to the kind of liberal news channel that I'm familiar with. But lots of other people were saying things that were completely contrary to the things that I was used to hearing. And I had no idea of just how significant those people were in terms of their capacity to vote for Brexit. So that's like kind of example. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think so. Let me see if I can tie two thoughts together and tell me if I'm tying them together in the right way. You had said that we've reached this sort of socio-technical level that means that that entails the undermining of people's freedom. And I take it that the socio-technical progress includes prominently social media, and the way in which it undermines freedom as a collective or individually is that a condition for being free is that you have a grip on reality. And if you don't have a grip on reality, then you can't actually exercise your autonomy, I don't know, or accurately.
I think that's true. If you voted for a politician based on a total bunch of lies, then actually you're voting in an informed way. And then, of course, there's the danger of various propaganda strategies to try and undermine the integrity of elections, and so on it goes. So in terms of the democratic environments in political culture, there are definitely threats there. And I think that what AI is enabling is it's actually also going further than just the realm of public fact and epistemic integrity, but to the eroding of opportunities for engaging in meaningful work and meaningful relationships with other people. So I think that AI is enabling that trajectory of destabilizing and corroding that kind of basic foundations for social, something even further than freedom, but social solidarity is being eroded as well.
To what extent, and
maybe this is a false dichotomy, but I'm going to offer it anyway to see what you have to say about it. To what extent is it a cultural problem versus a government/legal/regulatory problem or something along those lines? I could see someone saying, as I've said earlier, this is a shitty situation. It's not caused by government, and it's not clear that government, regulators, regulations, etc., is the appropriate solution. It seems like they're having a really large impact on our culture, and you don't get to the kind of culture that you want through laws and regulations and that sort of thing. You get it through soft power. You get it through local to non-local enforcement of social norms or something along those lines. And so it's on the collective us. And the collective us has been, I don't know, resting on its laurels. We've been lazy. We've said, oh, but I like scrolling.
True. Absolutely.
I like tweeting. And so if it's a failure, it's not a failure of government. It's a failure of our culture to rise to the moment. And the only thing that we could really do is, I don't know, try to push different kinds of cultural norms as opposed to saying something about it's the market, it's capitalism, it's something blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I think ultimately there's a serious cultural problem, particularly in the development culture of the tech industry. But I will say, I think, and this could be in terms of the fact that I'm from Europe and you're from the US, I actually have faith in the role and importance of legislative change to shift cultural norms and acceptability. So in terms of discrimination and sexual harassment, once those things were considered just fine, part of having fun, somebody says that's still part of having fun, you I know, and you're something of fun. But in Europe, we
I have no idea who you're talking about.
That's totally not okay. Those things are totally not okay. And the law played a really important role in shifting understandings of what is culturally acceptable. So I think that the law actually does have an important role to play. And I also think just like you, that leadership really matters. And I don't, unfortunately. And there's a further reason for this, which I hope we'll talk about, is the big tech government mutual, what's the pact really that's going on? It used to be called the industrial complex. I haven't quite come up with a name for it, but it's the sort of digital tech
industrial.
The tech industrial complex, not industrial. It's like there's a kind of symbiotic relationship between what big tech wants and what the nation state wants. Because, and this is what I think is really interesting, what's different from any other big pharma, big agrochemicals, big whatever you like, big tobacco.
Yeah.
And what's different is the commodity that is the focus of excitement and hype is packaged as intelligence. It's not that we're giving you pleasure in the form of tobacco or pharma that will solve your health problems and diseases. We're offering you intelligence in a box, and you flat out. And if you have more intelligence than the next guy or the next country, my goodness, you will outperform them in any dimension, because not only is it intelligence, but it's intelligence that generic in its application. So whatever sector you're working, whatever social sector, whatever industrial sector, economic sector, in the military sector, if you have our intelligence, by goodness, you will prevail over your competitors. So it's incredibly seductive for governments as it is for private firms. And given the context in which the AI development trajectory is portrayed as a race, and the race is to be the most intelligent, and whoever's the most intelligent will have the most power, control, and money. Impossible for leaders to resist that. Oh, okay, we'll just keep letting you pour money and do whatever you like, because nobody wants to hamper their own capacity for superiority in the political realm. So this, I think, really does make it different and makes it even harder to mobilize against that kind of logic.
So if I have one issue is you're more optimistic than I am that government can play a role in shaping the culture in the right kind of way. Yeah, and I suppose if I were from Europe, I'd probably have that sort of view. Like I think about France's outlawing of sending work emails after hours, or you don't have to read them or something like that. That's a bit, so how French is that?
No,
They may as well have mandated everyone has to have a croissant in the morning or something. But yeah, they have and that seems, oh, that's right. You can see a culture, certainly like America, where you're supposed to be available around the clock. Once you reach a certain level of seniority within an organization, there's no such thing as your private time. Not really. No, I'm available. I can do a phone call. I can hop on a call. I can respond to some emails at 10 o'clock at night or whatever. So there's that cultural expectation. And you can see, and France said, no, that's just not who we're going to be. And we're just going to make that illegal.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. And
That's what I cherish, the ability for the collective to say, no, we don't like that. We don't want it.
Yeah.
We're going to put some lines in the sand and say, as the French do, no.
No. Yeah, if there's anyone who's going to say no, it's going to be the French, and not just because of the word. I do see how that could happen there, not here. We can't agree on anything. We'd have the opposite. We'd have everyone has to respond to emails.
Yeah,
between
they try to
10
help
p.m. and
each other.
midnight.
I was
Yeah. It's a requirement. You have to work harder than anyone in China. That's the requirement, which is probably impossible. But the problem you're pointing out is that one reason why it's going to be really hard to get those kinds of things is not just because of the sort of, at least in America, the culture of keep government away, minimal government intervention, blah, 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 but also that they're in bed with the artificial intelligence, the AI, Silicon Valley more generally, because they're part and parcel of their national security posture.
Yeah, certainly it's being portrayed in that way.
Yeah,
and you've got a very particular administration right now, so things are worse than they've ever been. But even the less infantile politicians that you've previously had,
that's a low bar, don't you think?
we're still willing to buy that narrative.
Yeah. Okay.
From the American end, I didn't mean it to be.
No, we're aware. We know things don't look good. Honestly, AI is the least of our problems. Yeah, that's not great. Can you say a little bit more? Do you really think, though, that, I don't know, all this fight for intelligence, is it BS in your view? Is there really an intelligence arms race?
I certainly think that and in fact, the political economy literature demonstrates that there is a dynamic of fear in which the AI race is dominated by the US and China. And it's a little bit like the race to the moon between the Soviets and the US back in that. And it's very similar in terms of that Cold War mentality. To pour money in because we're going to bloody well beat the Chinese. You know, that logic you hear just everywhere. We can't put guardrails on this because the Chinese will do it. We don't do it, the Chinese will do it. And that's used as a kind of excuse not to do anything because heaven forbid the Chinese will do it. And so this becomes a kind of mutually fulfilling circle of, and further, otherwise the Chinese will do it and then we'll be completely subjugated.
Okay, so where does this all leave us? If you waved a magic wand and certain things changed, what's changing? Or to put it slightly less dramatically, if you could direct people, push for this kind of thing, what should we be pushing for? What should we be fighting for?
I can't. I would like ideally to see some collective red lines being reached at the global level, particularly in relation to autonomous weapons and that sort of thing, for example. But you can't even agree on that because you have a classic prisoner's dilemma.
Sure.
And nobody wants to say, oh, we won't use those because you might. And then I'm really in trouble, right? I will get really sharp. Yeah. So there are some basic things I wish that we could collectively agree to at the global level. In the absence of global agreement, then I think that different communities need to decide what they want for themselves and stick to it. And I do think Europe should have the courage of its conviction and stand up to Trump and say, too bad if you don't like our digital tech regulation, this is what we're having here. And if you want to sell your products into the European market, then they're going to have to comply with these requirements. And it worked for the GDPR, and it's a big market. The US tech firms don't want to miss out on access to that market. So I just wish that they would say, like the French, no, believe. These are our guardrails, and if you don't like it, too bad, you can sell elsewhere. But then they also need in Europe to stump up investment in their own homegrown digital tech industry. And that's
Right.
where we're not seeing that level of commitment because of the sense in which there isn't enough money to go around. So there's a kind of wanting to have your cake but not have to invest in the cake that we need in order to deliver it.
Yeah. I wonder if there's another cultural element here, which is that, from what I gather, maybe this is anecdotal, but it's not just a money issue, it's a culture issue because the freewheeling Wild West Americans maybe were reckless, but were reckless innovators. And Europeans tend to be a bit more conservative, a bit less, let's take over the world kind of stuff. And so it's not just a lack of funds, it's a kind of, there's the American entrepreneurial spirit, Silicon Valley spirit, blah, 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 that, I don't know, of course there's a startup community in London, but is it like the startup community in San Francisco or New York? I don't know.
Yeah, so there is a really interesting, I think, cultural difference in terms of worshipping at the shrine of unfettered innovation. So
We got that.
The whole UX mentality is you got to break a few eggs to make an omelette. The kind of
Exactly.
the
Right.
collateral damage associated with
Yeah.
first industrial revolution and so on and so forth. That's just the name of the game. And you want to
Yeah.
be on the side of the winners. And the losers just
Yeah.
lose. And I think that there is a much stronger sense of social solidarity and a focus on the community relational dimension in Europe. It's a bit like don't sit up to 5 o'clock or whatever it is. They're not productive if we did, but we
Yeah.
want to be sitting around drinking wine and eating roasted vegetable. I
Yeah.
think you're right.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there is a different attitude to rampant unfettered innovation is not something that is considered sacred because some innovation is bad. And those things you probably couldn't say in the US because even if some innovation is bad, you wouldn't know unless you tried it.
Innovation is like it's the thing. The other thing is, this is kind of anecdotal. We have some friends who have spent a lot of time in Europe, lived in Europe for many years. They're American, but they lived in Europe for many years and lots of traveling. And they relatively recently said to my wife, "You're very European about your work," which is to say, she doesn't take it that her work identifies. It is not her identity. It's like she goes to work, she wants to do a great job, she works really hard at work, but it's not her source of identity, her source of personal identity. It's not what her life revolves around. That's the thing that I do from not quite 9 to 5 because it's America. It's a thing she does, but what's really important is the other stuff, family and friends and blah, blah, blah. And these friends of ours said, and I've heard this a number of times, that in America, it's totally standard to ask a complete stranger or somebody that you've just met at a party, so what do you do? Whereas in Europe, like that's just not the kind of thing because no one really gives a shit. That's not who defines you. And so again, it's part of it is, which I think is healthy, by the way, right? To be like, yeah, I do that stuff so I can pay the bills, but I care about the theater or whatever the hell it is. I don't know. So maybe this is more caricature than characterizing, but if at least broadly, I don't know, gestures towards the truth about, or a truth about difference of European culture versus American culture, we take our work to be part of our identity. And so we want to achieve and have an impact and blah, blah, blah. Whereas I think Europeans are more like, achieve and have an impact. Yeah, that'd be nice, but that's not, however you say, raison d'etre or whatever the French would say. That's this is the most French I've used in any conversation. That I had never taken French, and so I did the accent. But yeah, so I feel like that's another part of a cultural difference where it's not just lack of money. It's not just lack of cultural difference around the altar of innovation. It's also Europeans don't take their work as personally seriously as Americans do, especially the sort of wealthier Americans who are involved in the innovation game or in business generally.
I think there certainly are a lot of cultural differences in terms of identity, although I would say I think European professionals do still identify very centrally with their professional work, but say not to the extent that I suspect Americans do. I've only got a very limited sample of Americans, so I can't say that I speak for the
Yeah, we're all the same. It doesn't matter. You've seen one, you've seen them all. It's fine.
But I think that it's much less laissez-faire in Europe, where people care about collective decision-making and collective values and the features of their shared environment. Those things matter, like the no email after 5 o'clock or whatever it is. And I think there is a kind of deep-seated cultural and political recognition that those decisions really do need to be made collectively. And having said that, I still think there's an extraordinary I'd like to say apathy, but I don't think it's true of the ordinary person. I don't think the ordinary person understands what's going on and what's at stake. And I think that's part of the mystique and the hype associated with AI, particularly because it does some pretty cool stuff, right? Now, the fact that it does pretty cool stuff doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make our lives better, and in what ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the big wedge is. And we've even seen a little bit of a dampening in the AI tech stock bubble because of the wedge between adoption and hard-edged increases in productivity, where you see AI adoption. So there's a big gap between the capability of a technology to do cool stuff and to turn that into genuine real-world benefits, not just productivity benefits, but welfare enhancements to people's lives that actually make our lives better and more worth living than it was before AI. That's a deeply value-laden question. And I kind of wish people would think about that question more than just getting excited about the technology. How do we want to live instead of, hey, here's a cool technology?
Yeah. There's this, I think that's totally right. I had a conversation recently, that'd actually be a podcast episode that, I don't know, maybe it'll release before this one or not, but it was with David Polgard of All Tech is Human. We were talking about how the tech industry has a totally impoverished conception of what constitutes well-being. Like, either one, they don't have a conception at all.
Exactly.
Or they confuse it with short-term pleasure.
Yes.
Like, I enjoyed scrolling for 5 minutes or whatever it is. And like, that's what well-being consists of then, whatever they enjoy.
Or time on site. Remember years ago before AI hit the sun, some dude from Stanford was saying, but look, kids spend more time gaming than with their friends. And I'm thinking, that's not an indication that the games are better, but that you talk with a friend alone. That's called addiction.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask you one last question that I think pulls together some of the stuff that we've been talking about. So we've talked a little bit about capitalism. We've touched on job loss for a moment. Now we've talked about well-being. What are your thoughts on, do you think that we're getting to a place where jobs are lost? And actually, there's this weird thing where this is also utopia by the likes of Silicon Valley. We don't have to work anymore. We'll go off and do creative things.
Most jobs can be automated. Let's assume that for the sake of argument. What does that mean for how we live and work as a community? So I'm no longer employed. Let's say we automate education and research. I don't have a job anymore as an academic. There's nothing for me to do. The question of, well, how am I going to support myself and feed my family, as well as how am I going to occupy myself and do something that I feel is worthwhile and meaningful? And I just don't feel like the tech dudes have got an answer for that. Sit in a vat, eat popcorn and watch Netflix, because that doesn't sound like my idea of eternal fun.
Just for one weekend, not every day. Every day you're going to blow your brains out.
Again, what we're not doing is thinking, what kind of a world do we want to live in and how do we want to live in it? Those questions are just not being asked. And this is a problem.
Yeah, it doesn't matter because productivity's increased and efficiency's increased. That's,
indeed.
As long as, that's all that matters.
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly why I'm troubled. But I don't know how. I don't think there are any quick fixes, but I guess the first place is for people to be a little bit more alive to what is going on and for there to be good leadership where these questions are asked and taken seriously so that we might think about collectively acting in a way that will, in fact, consciously and intentionally make choices about the future trajectory of the way in which we wish to live and the way in which we wish to live with these digital technologies. And those decisions are not being made collectively in any Western country that I can see. Europe is doing a little bit of gesturing, but they're running scared of Trump. And at the present time, I don't see this actually moving in a positive direction.
Great. On that positive note, thanks so much. It's been such a fun conversation and enlightening.
It has been fun. It was
and
not
depressing.
the way I thought we were going to get, but it was fun anyway.
Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I want to thank a few people who make this all possible. Delano Alexander, he's my producer. He does such an amazing job on everything that he touches. Garrett Lang is the sound engineer. That's honestly, he's too good for me. Athmia Jairam has joined us recently. He's helping us find the best guests to bring onto this podcast. And Ashley Wasilenko helps us organize all this, get people on the schedule, get people's bios, headshots, and really keeps the train on the track. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate all the hard work you do.